Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural first ever BR313 Symposium, a new show that we're adding to this channel. And the purpose of this will be to have a casual chats with people whose work we like and respect, and to also take people you probably not aware of and give them a bigger audience. And we also have some big names booked as well for future shows. So basically what we're trying to do here is to create an old-fashioned symposium like they had in ancient Greece, where not only does the main guest be interviewed, but it's also a dialogue. It's friendly, it's laid back, and the hope is to find some new ideas and common ground and perhaps make us think about things that we've never thought about before. So there's a real sense of gestation and we're sort of like a free form thing that we're going to have to put into this. But this is the first one. We're a bit nervous, but we have a great guest for it, and it is Fiona Aedgar from Northern Ireland, who's going to talk about subjects dear to her heart and mine as well, with the exception of astrology is something I'm really not the best on, and I don't think Jason is either. And so we're going to talk about that, as well as her journey into paganism and heathenism and some other things as well. And so sit back and enjoy the next while we're talking to Fiona. So how are you, Fiona? And it's a delight to have you here. Congratulations, you're number one. And that was picked for a reason, because we wanted someone who I knew had a good ability to talk on the topics that they're interested in, and that meant a lot, that we wanted to hit the ground running. And so when we thought about it, we said Fiona was probably the best guest, and also we're friends as well, so it creates a nice atmosphere rather than us being terrified of putting a stranger on for the first show. So thank you for coming, and we're delighted. So the first question I would like to ask, Jason and I will both be talking to you, is what brought you to where you are now in life regarding your spiritual development and your interest in things such as heathenism, paganism, and astrology?
Well, first of all, it's really nice to be here, guys, and I'm totally honored that you chose me as the first guest. So thanks very much for that. Um, wow, well, that's a very long story. Well, as you just said, I did grow up in Northern Ireland during the 80s and the 90s, which was a bit of a crazy time. I was directly affected by the terrorism that happens in this country, otherwise known as the Troubles. So I had a difficult childhood. I've never really talked much about this publicly, to be perfectly honest, but I do feel like this is a good time, because it explains a little bit about my background and where I've come from. My family were under death threat for many, many years. We got a phone call one day. We had to leave very suddenly, and just stuff like that. So I was actually 8 years old when that happened. It shaped my childhood massively, as you can imagine. But back then, people just didn't get any kind of help for that. There was no counseling. So you were just told, oh, you just have to get on with it. My family never considered moving away. All of my generations of ancestors have lived here, so it just didn't feel right to leave. I'm glad that they didn't, because I'm sure that if I'd grown up somewhere else, I probably wouldn't be the same person as I am today. So I had a bit of a traumatic childhood. I had unhealed trauma, because no one really did anything about it. And as a result of that, I guess I grew up as a bit of a fearful person. I don't mean fearful as in kind of, waiting for the bogeyman to jump out of the closet or anything like that. But I mean, I grew up with a mistrust of the people that I grew up with. Because there was a lot of secrets back then. You couldn't trust your neighbors in some circumstances. So I was always a spiritual person, always had a strong belief in that. Absolutely 100% rejected Christianity from a very young age. Never resonated with me. I used to sit in Sunday school furious that I had been forced to go there, and grovel to some guy nailed to a piece of wood. I was furious. And even then, I felt a very profound lack of respect for this person. You know, as an 8 or 9 year old, this person who was teaching to turn the other cheek, you know, basically make yourself into a doormat. It never sat well with me. But I did have a lot of experiences within my childhood that could not be explained. Both of my parents are very intuitive. They're both water signs. I'm a water sign. And I remember one night during, this was just before everything kicked off. Actually, I don't remember because I was asleep in bed, but my mom heard footsteps, very heavy footsteps, marching up and down outside my bedroom door. And it was shortly after that that all of the kind of stuff kicked off. So we had a lot of stories like that in my family. That led me to a spiritual path. Both of my great grandparents were spiritualists, which was quite unusual in those days, you know, for people in that generation. And my grandmother was into, you know, spiritual stuff. My uncle was an art teacher who was into all kinds of stuff, and it had an effect on me. But what that led me to the New Age and the mishmash of kind of disasters that the New Age is, you know, without any kind of ancestral stuff. It was all like, okay, let's follow Native American practices, even though Lakota actually put a declaration of war against any white Westerners that were following their practices, and the usual angelic mishmash of complete nonsense that just leaves you open to spiritual attacks, really. Well, you know yourself what it was like, Tom. I mean, there wasn't really any ancestral knowledge that was expressed back in those days, really. Maybe it was different where you're from, but certainly not in Northern Ireland.
No, I think both Northern Ireland and the Republic were both very conservative in different ways back then. And I grew up, you know, I'm assuming you grew up Protestant in the north. I grew up Catholic in the south. Although my family wasn't, they weren't religious or anything. I wasn't forced into anything really. Although I did all the routine, the first Holy Communion, all that stuff. But I had the same experience with the church that you did. I resented things like, from a very early age, I resented things like the Stations of the Cross, whereas pictures of Jesus going through his suffering, and it's really just S&M. It's quite violent and brutal, and it has a damaging effect on a child. And I can remember also communion wafers used to make me feel sick and queasy. They never. There was a sensation of wanting to vomit and gag when they went into my mouth, and so from like, I think I completely rejected it by the time I was 10, and formally told my parents and people I knew I don't believe in any of this by the time I was 12, and was quite hostile against it. And a lot of that had to do because of what was going on around. The sectarian stuff didn't really affect the South, but it still left a terrible shadow on the psyche of the island as a whole, and people were never right because of it. And that's why I think definitely took my path, had a lot to do with that. Like you, there was a bomb exploded in Dublin around the corner from me when I was about 10. And it wasn't like, I wasn't in immediate danger, but I did hear the bang, and I did hear all, it was there, and a lot of people were killed. It was like the 74 bombings. And it was one of those moments where I just wanted nothing to do with anything political, or in terms of like, I'm joining this or I'm part of that. I wanted out of it. And that's like around the same time I started to discover magic. So just like yourself, it was, like you said, it probably wouldn't have happened if I grew up in England or in a sort of a liberal family in America. I probably, like yourself, wouldn't be who I am now. Mm-hmm. Anything to add to that, Jason?
Yeah, Fiona, you were talking about the New Age stuff, and fortunately for me, I have a little bit different of a spiritual upbringing story. I wasn't raised Christian at all, or had any kind of influence of the Abrahamic religions in my life. So I was fortunate enough to have two parents who were kind of spiritual on their own and had their own spiritual path. And then as I went on growing up, there was, the typical New Age stuff, and some people were into tarot and the astrology. But it's just interesting, like you're saying, there's this kind of mixed up, watered down version of spirituality that to me, I just look at it and I see the same kind of thing. It's basically just Christianity rebranded into something. And then when I came across your work, Fiona, it really it struck me as, okay, she knows what's going on. This person has some ability here, and she's got some real magic. And I've just been fascinated by what you have to offer.
Thank you,
Fiona. Regarding, you said, the pitfalls of the New Age journey you went on. A lot of people go on to it. Tell me about the positives, what you gained from it.
I learned very quickly how to deal with negative entities. Let's put it that way, because the New Age scene is really crawling with entities because they're doing stuff like mediumship, calling in forces that they really have no idea how to deal with. I did do a bit of mediumship just for the crack, to be perfectly honest, because I just thought, what the hell? I knew that was not the person's soul. It was the fragment of their personality that has kind of been drifting around in this reality since they passed. But, the people out there, they think, oh, that's really Granda Joe. He's really here. So I did that. I was quite good at it. Then I actually got into shamanism, which has stayed with me ever since. Now, the kind of shamanism that I started with was very New Agey. It wasn't really the real deal, but I did learn how to take a shamanic journey. And as I've got onto my heathen path, I've learned how to journey to the Norse 9 worlds. There are a lot of plastic shamans, especially on this island for some reason. I have no idea why there's so many. And, they're charging people like 500 quid for a weekend to be a shaman. And it's such a dangerous path because you can become very powerful on that path. So there are a lot of entities out there. Time does not exist for them. They can spot who is going to be good and they will try and wipe you out. And these plastic shamans, they're not teaching any form of protection. Even the power animals, they get it wrong. First of all, they call it a totem animal. It isn't. In the Norse traditions, it would be called a fylgja. So if you're from Ireland, it's not going to be a Komodo dragon or like a giraffe,
Or a tiger.
Yeah, it's going to be the bear. Or wolf or wild boar, and those animals kick ass. You don't need a Komodo dragon if you've got a wild boar on your side. I learned how to read the tarot, which I have been doing now for about 20 years. And I also learned how to read the runes. Most importantly, I think I learned astrology. So it was actually my oldest sister that got me into astrology a very long time ago. We were messing around, and I'm a Cancer, and she had this book on rising signs, which of course is determined by your birth time. So then I learned that I had Gemini rising and Scorpio moon. And the descriptions that I was reading just resonated with me so deeply. It really described me. So then I started to study it, and I've never stopped. It gripped me in a way like nothing really has apart from heathenry. And I used Western astrology, which was perfected by the ancient Greeks. The reason why, now you get a whole lot of arguments, people arguing on the internet who usually have no working practice with astrology whatsoever. There's that argument about sidereal astrology versus tropical. I'm a pagan. I follow the wheel of the year, all of the pagan holidays, which is basically what the Western birth chart is based on. It's based on the equinoxes and the solstices.
what you were saying then about the power animals in Ireland, yeah, I made a mistake then. You could have used the saber-toothed tiger because they once roamed here many thousands of years ago. But it reminded me of something else. I met a guy down in Cork who was West Cork, which is full. It was a big New Age kind of area, and he was kind of like an interesting shamanic guy. He was clued in like yourself, and his power element was the actual the tiger sharks which live in the coast around Ireland. And I thought that was, hey, that's just fine, you know. So that was his tiger. It was the tiger shark around for his power animal around the coast. I thought that was kind of genius. That you can with a bit of imagination. However, I've met people who said they were Navajo or Lakota shamans, you know, and they have no idea. There's two reasons for two things for that, right? One is like, first, you're robbing someone. You really are spiritually appropriating here. You know, you are, whether you like it or not. And whether you know, there's nothing wrong with studying it, learning it, enjoying it. But to say you're one of them is wrong. It's you have a tribal soul, and and they were doing this, and they could you see they were not well. You know, you could see it was not working for them. It was very superficial and fake. And I says, well, what, you know, there's no Irish shamanic tradition, but that's okay. There's not much shamanism in Europe anyway. There is the satyrs of the North, but they're a bit they're different, just like the Druids were different. There wasn't pure shamanism in the Siberian, Asian, American sense, Inuit sense, but you could see there was an insincerity there that was damaging them. It was damaging their spiritual journey.
It's kind of like a cosplay thing that a lot of Americans get into. They pick up like this buffet version of all the different spiritual traditions and pick and choose. But it's just acting in cosplay. It's the equivalent of them dressing up as, you know, in their superhero costumes and everything. But, you know, once you start as an American, once you start listening to someone like Fiona and yourself, Thomas, it's like it resonates deeply within you. It's just there's something different from that than there is from just, you know, picking up a book from Barnes and Nobles and saying you're a shaman because you read a book one weekend.
Americans of European heritage, this is theirs as well. In fact, I'd rather them do that than Carlos Castaneda. You know, that's interesting stuff too. But like, if you're of any European ancestry in America, this is yours as well. Mm-hmm. You know, there is a tribal soul. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, there is, and we've all been cheated out of that through Abrahamism, you know, especially over here now that a lot of folks are coming more aware of the fact that Abrahamism is just like an evil system and all it's caused is misery and disempowerment, and it's really a very unnatural way of life, and look around you for, you know, the evidence of that. But your ancestral spiritual path will bring so much enrichment and strength to your own life. I can't even describe to you how much change it's brought to my life. You know, I did mention earlier about growing up as a kind of wounded person, you know, unaware very much of my own wounds until I got older and, you know, on a more strong spiritual path. But the way that I have healed these wounds has been through the veneration of my ancestors, because it's really an ancestral wound that's been repeating over and over again. It's never been healed because of Abrahamism. They don't look into that, you know, as long as you grovel to like this kind of desert entity, then your ancestors don't matter. And the gods, our gods, the Norse gods or the Irish gods, whichever you choose to follow, they're our ancestors, our blood brothers, our guides. And it really is a terrible magic spell that they have cast upon us, because if the gods cease to exist, then so would we.
Well, this is the thing that's so beautiful about this to me has always been the fact that you could be a Norse pagan, a Celtic pagan, a Celt-Iberian pagan, a Slavic pagan, a Tangian pagan, and there's no conflict at all from a spiritual standpoint, because it's all basically the same archetypes resolved in the local environmental spiritual field. Like, for instance, you wouldn't have an ice god, an ice giant in southern Italy in the same way you would have less aspect of a sun god in northern Norway. But it's the same thing. There would be less. The entities would exist, but you'd have different aspects considering where you were from. Like in Ireland, MacManaman MacLear, the god of the sea, makes perfect sense for Ireland and the Isle of Man, because we're islands in the middle of the ocean, so we're bound by the sea. So that entity was always going to be powerful. And the same thing in Norway, which you would have got with Thor and Loki, with the constant thunderstorms they get there, incredible thunderstorms they get there in summertime. And at the same time, too, remember the story of the Vikings who went to Greenland and encountered the Thule people. These were Inuit. These were First Nations people. Yet they saw them as comparables in a completely different way than, say, when Columbus landed with his 3 ships and instantly started killing these people. That's because there was no need to convert them. The Vikings weren't interested in converting the Inuit or the Native American people of Canada, and that to me was the most liberating thing of all with the pagan stuff.
Yeah, and they've done their hardest to really cover all of this up, to remove us from ourselves, our true selves, really. Even the fact that most Irish people will have, Norse DNA. I mean, I'd say maybe 3/4 of the surnames within my family line are from Old Norse. And I did get a DNA test. I know there's a lot of they'll have your DNA. It was worth it to me. I'm like 22% Danish. My dad is even higher. My best friend just got her test done today, and she's like 35%. Her surname is Old Norse. It's just been, they're so terrified of the Wotanic consciousness rising that they just, they know it, and they've named all of our beautiful holy sites. They always get St. Patrick involved.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, St. Patrick might have visited here. And this is where they used to initiate like Irish kings. It's so rich and the beauty and history, and they have to throw St. Patrick in there.
Well, I got thrown off a historical forum on Facebook recently when I pointed out that Brian Boru was opposed by many Irish people who sided with the Vikings because he was a dictator. He wasn't crowned under the edicts of Tara. He put a crown on his head and declared himself High King of Ireland without going through the protocols. And this is why many groups in Ireland fought on the side of the Danish. But to show the intolerance of the Abrahamic, the first thing he did when he got to Dublin was destroy Thor's Grove in the north of the city. Because Dubliners were known as Tomar, and Irish were known to the rest of Irish people as Tomar Muntir, which means the people of Thor. The city had reverted back to paganism, and they were worshipping the old pagan gods again. Christianity had died, and Brian Boru, obviously on a mission from the Pope, was sent up to the east coast and north coast of Ireland to cleanse out the Norseman and to restore Abrahamism. And that comes up over and over again.
Yeah, so he was a traitor then. He's not worth celebrating, I'm not gonna celebrate him or St. Patrick, who probably, didn't exist in the first place, but.
And then they give us token saints like Bridge, and they say, oh, God, she was a pagan goddess, but she converted to Christianity. No, you stole her. You stole her.
Yeah, well, they stole a lot of things, They stole a lot of things. It's such an unbalanced system. My parents are Christian, but they're very liberal Christians. They fully support what I do, and they're just, they see my veg vizier tattoos and my Valknuts, and they just kind of roll their eyes. But the older that I got, I just couldn't deny it anymore, that it's a completely evil system. It's turned people into the husks of what they could have been. Even if they're...
It's like African Americans in the United States returning to the African religions and stuff, and they're being made fun of wearing African traditional clothes. And I was like, no, they've actually got it right. That's the way to do it. That's their real path to freedom, to embrace their Pan-African identity, and they can still be Americans. They don't have to be, but the thing was that after like Malcolm X, they got very wise, the African Americans, with this stuff, saying that we really should be looking towards our African identity, which they did. And you do have, like, in places like New Orleans, where people do celebrate the African religions and stuff like that, the old pagan religions. It never fully went away in Louisiana and places like that. So this is the thing about paganism. It's unbelievably resilient, unbelievably resilient. It cannot be destroyed because it is self-evident as being the reality of the life and the universe we live in. You know, that's how I always look at it.
You know, I didn't know that. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, Jason. What are you going to say?
Oh, no, sorry. Fiona, you were about to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say I didn't know that about the African Americans, but I think that's totally fantastic. And I think every race, every culture really needs to work hard to preserve their unique traditions and culture.
Especially now with globalization.
Along with that, Fiona, you mentioned something earlier about ancestral trauma, and that's something that I'm interested in as well. And, you know, according to certain spiritual paths, there's the idea that this kind of template that Abrahamism or the Abrahamic, you know, whatever Christianity uses, is that way of instilling the trauma into the tribal soul of a people. Is there something there that you would pick up on about, you know, if, you know, Christianity coming or whatever coming along and Christianizing a bunch of, you know, pagan Europeans, pagan Africans, pagan Pacific Islanders, whatever group it is there something to that with the ancestral trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the result of that is really that every generation will carry and inherit the wounds that have kind of gone unresolved, you know, from the previous generations, which is why we're in this kind of mess at the minute with a lot of broken people. The way to work through that, I mean, it's not that I don't approve of these practices, but I think that they're kind of lacking something. You can go, I mean, I get a lot of clients, they say, look, I went to therapy, I went for a year, I went for 2 years, I just don't feel better. And they've worked through, you know, it helps to talk. They've worked through a lot of stuff, maybe helps with some behavioral patterns or whatever. But the only true way to heal wounds that are ancestral and that, you know, are traumatic wounds is that you need to go back to your ancestral practices. Because when you work with Thor, when you work with Odin, or whichever group of gods that you choose to work with, you're activating those qualities, those traits within yourself, and it realigns you. It kind of resets you. Like, let me give you an example. In my own family, there is a pattern of failed businesses. So this has happened a couple of times. They start a business, for whatever reason, it just doesn't work. You know, it all goes to shit. And that has been a repeating theme. In other families, you'll see alcoholism, you know, just the usual kind of stuff. So when I started on my path with Heathenry, Astrology, my business took off beyond my wildest dreams. So I became quite successful in a matter of months. Before that, you know, I was doing well, but I just wasn't earning enough money to live on comfortably. So that isn't a good example about how it can really work to heal those issues.
That's it's like, I was just going to say, in Ireland there is an awful lot of ancestral curses, and a lot of it has to do with religious wars. You know, the sectarian wars in Ireland have been going on better part of 400 years. And some of them in the past were quite, like the Confederacy War, I think 1/3 of the population of the island was killed. I mean, it's almost unbelievable when you think of the carnage that Abraham religions have brought upon this island. It's shocking. But I also believe it's for a reason too. I think especially with Ulster, there's definitely, it's being attacked for a reason. That's why it was planted on purpose, because there was something in about Ulster. There was something about that. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I think a lot of those things are carried through, whether they're alcoholism, relationship failures, business failures, wherever. I think that all of that stuff, in many cases, when you see the same pattern repeated from generation to generation, that's absolutely an ancestral curse that hasn't been broken. And traditionally in Ireland, they break it by emigrating. That was that was the way they did it. And that happened with the Italians. Sicilians would have ancestral curses as well. And they would emigrate as well to America and elsewhere to break the line. And that's why they became successful in the new countries. But the internal spiritual emigration away from Abrahamic religions and back to your pagan past is another way of breaking it.
It's like you said, Fiona, about the empty. It leaves like an empty husk of a person once they've become, Abrahamized. And as you're saying, it's like as soon as you return to that path, it's like that empty husk falls away, and your roots start to grow back, and you start to be full again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I've had quite a colorful life. I've had a life that was very, very up and down. I did a lot of things. I carried that trauma around in my 20s. I partied a lot in my 20s, and it was just a way to try and numb, what had happened, and no one spoke about it. But I can honestly tell you that I feel the best that I ever have done in my life. I'm nearly 40, and everything is kind of going right for me now. Whereas before I tried to start something, it would fall away. I tried to leave this bloody island so many times, I cannot even tell you. I lived in the States for a while. Absolutely loved it. I love the American people. They're so positive. They're so nice. But something just kept saying, no, you have to go back. And then, I realized that this is my life purpose, is to, as it is with Thomas as well, to bring this back. And yeah, and Thomas has done so much to make people aware of paganism, and polytheism. And that's part of my work as well. And I will say that ancestral trauma is quite easy to spot within the birth chart. So, if anyone, if you can't spot it, you need some help there, well, you can find me at, on my website, and we can talk about it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We'll put your website up on the screen the whole time anyway. So tell me specifically about your working with specific gods and goddesses. I've seen you do like the venerations on Thursdays and Fridays for Freya and Thor, but tell us specifically how you do that, how you prepare your day, what emotional resonance would you generate inside yourself for this?
Yeah, well, the first kind of ritual day was created by a friend of mine called Anders Nilsson. And he started Odin World Prayer Day. It is a day of ritual, but he actually sells some statues, and he's written a very good book, which you can buy. So I did Odin World Prayer Day for a while. What I would do is, you have to give the gods an offering. It is an exchange of energy. If you want something in return, you have to give something. It's natural law. This whole thing where you beg and you plead to the desert.
Spiritual welfare.
Spiritual welfare, yep. And, it violates natural law. So you're paying for it in some other way. So I would...
That's why they denigrated the pagan concept of sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. So I always...
No, go ahead.
I give Odin an offering of mead. Odin drinks wine or mead or a lot of other liquor, but he doesn't eat food. So I wouldn't give Odin an offering of... I like to light a fire for him, a sacred fire. It's not that practical if you're living in an apartment in a city, so you can have tea lights, incense smoke, which I think acts as a kind of vessel that carries the energy into their realm. Yeah. And I would basically speak from the heart. Sometimes I read poetry to Odin. and I just give him my words and give him an offering and invite his energy into my life. I will say that anytime that I meditate during that ritual, Odin gives me very, very clear images. So when I worked with other gods previous to that, like when I was a kind of like new ager, you know, I did the mishmash pantheon thing where you go from one to the other. And I will say that I did communicate with them, but it was like speaking through a glass wall. But with Odin, it's just it's so crystal clear. And Odin will give you physical signs as well. Like for a while, I mean, last year I had 2 crows stuck in my fence, 2 separate crows. I took pictures of them and put them on Facebook while I was still there. But that was at a time in my life. That was a clear sign from him because I was in a very stuck part of my life. And that was a sign that I kind of needed to move on. But since then, I've created Frigga World Prayer Day, Ritual Day, and Thor. If anyone wants, it's actually Thor World Prayer Day tonight. So I'm going to be doing a ritual with Thor. The last time that we did that, I think it was like a day or 2 afterwards, there were some like awesome thunderstorms over in England, lightning, rains, all kinds of stuff. So doesn't have to be difficult. If you go on to Telegram and you search for those channels, I've written a ritual for Thor and you can follow that.
I have a friend in Norway and her name is Sif, which is Thor's wife in the Eddas. And she feels she's married to Thor. And every time she goes to a new city or to live, to work, whatever, there's always a thunderstorm when she arrives. And that's the augury that she's told that Thor is there to protect her or with her. So it's very similar to the Odin thing and seeing the ravens or the crows. When I was getting heavily, well, not heavily, but when I was really opening up my world to this about 6 years ago, that I was constantly being followed by ravens and crows. Like they were, and I was just noticing them. They were there. They were constantly there. In huge numbers, you know, and that was always like the power of that, you know, you know, you have people who go to, Christians and people in the Abrahamic religion, they pray for something to happen. Please cure me, please give me money, please do this, but they don't sacrifice for it, so they want it for nothing really. And where it does not, as you said yourself, that's in violation of the universe and how it works. Everything is in this reality is a flow and a change of energy. Mm-hmm. And that's very interesting though about you said you have visualizations when you're Odin. Do you feel a fatherly kind of vibe?
Sometimes it depends what mood he's in. You know, Odin is a very mercurial character. Sometimes he's there and sometimes he isn't there, you know. But yeah, he's a very protective presence, very beautiful presence. He does, as soon as you start to work with Odin, you get immediate signs that he's there. You know, the Odinic consciousness is rising within your own DNA, really. But yeah, there's no doubt that he's there. Odin is absolutely everywhere at the minute. Like he's in I think a couple of different TV shows that we had over the past couple of years. Everywhere you go, it's Odin. You know, of course, we had the Marvel stuff too, but that's signs of the consciousness rising.
He's also on the darker end, the Votanic end as well, that your manic Voden. What we're seeing right now with the coming out the scandemic of the last year is that Botanic wild hunt. You can even see the characters who are central to it, like Fauci, are now being struck down. And I don't want to get, you know, too political, but this is as above, so below. These things are real. And there's also very cold weather coming constantly down from the north at the moment. There's been very strange activity around the North Pole. And again, that's the cold sword of the north. That's the Botanic energy again. And this is a time, I feel like, from my own spiritual intuitiveness, that this is a time of the wild hunt, that basically humanity is being Votan is charging with the sword right at us, and you either jump in front of the sword to be taken by the wild hunt, or you stand aside to live. And huge numbers of people are choosing to stand in the way of his blade or his spear, or be trampled under Slipnir, his steed. I really do feel there's a strong Votanic aspect, wild hunt going on right now.
Yeah.
So he is everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Like, I think it was maybe last year. I think it was last year, or maybe the start of this year. I got up, made my coffee as I always do. Went outside, saw the wild hunt in the clouds. It was right there, very vivid. I did take a photograph, posted it on Facebook, but I'm not there anymore, so it got lost. But that was when I knew that we're in Ragnarok. This is the wolf age. Like you say, this is supposed to happen. A lot of people are falling to the sword, but unfortunately, it's kind of their own fault, because they're being cowards. They're being weak. There are other people that, like older people, kids, whatever. It's not their fault, but there are a lot of people who are choosing to be this way, and the gods do not favor cowards at all.
No, this is the whole thing, isn't it? The honor thing, that like this was what the pagans couldn't understand about the Abrahamic religions, is where's the honor? Where's the honor? And the pagan gods in all the Indo-European pantheons are very human. They have their bad moments, they have their good moments, they have their failings. They're very accessible in their life stories and their emotions. They make mistakes. And they have regrets. And that was where they weren't this omnipotent, all-powerful, sky fairy in the sky. They were us projected into a supernatural realm, and therefore the responsibility. When they failed in their tasks, they also suffered as well. So there was that's never been put across in the Abrahamic religion, that you have a self-responsibility. It's not God's will. That was always the thing. Like my grandparents would have had like loads of kids that they couldn't afford at that time. But the church used to say, oh, you can't have contraception because it's God's will. And this is this, as you said, it takes somebody, it's like an ancestral curse again. It takes someone to say, no, I'm not going to do this. No, I'm going to take my own. And that's when the honor comes into it. That's when the honor comes into it.
Yeah, honor is very important within the northern traditions, and honor actually protects you from stuff like spiritual attacks. And whatever choices that you make, your descendants, your great grandchildren, whatever, they're actually going to inherit the consequences of those. So it's not just about you. We live in a very me, self-focused society now, but back in pagan days, people still had that wisdom. They knew that their choices were just not affecting, their own lives. They had to think about their descendants as well.
And future incarnations.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, very important. That's one that's never really spoken about, is where's your ass going to be in 3 or 4 generations? That's that's the lesson the Hindus give us with karma, and the concept of like what you do now reflects what you'll be in your future life. That has so many repercussions and things like, you see the Abrahamics. Oh, well, we're destroying the Earth ecosphere. What do? Well, we'll move to Mars. Mars becomes space Israel. The promised land. We're all going to go there. Where if you're a pagan or a Hindu and you're coming back, and that is a central tenet of my paganism and all paganism in general, is that you're coming back. You will look after what you will inherit in a future generation. You won't. You won't say, oh, well, I'm going to go to heaven after this, so it doesn't matter.
It's like they're clearing themselves out already by trying to get off the planet.
Oh, Goodbye. Goodbye. On your website, Fiona, there's a picture of you at Braymore Stone Circle, and you know me, I love the megaliths, and we went to Carrowkeel Creevy Keel years ago, when you were up here in Sligo, remember that? And the that is a remarkable stone circle, I feel. Yes, that where you were, the one in the Northern Ireland, the Braymore, the one that your photos on. Did you notice how they have those lines of straight stones running, dissecting the circles? And somebody theorized it was a calendar of future comet or meteor or asteroid strikes. And this, by knowing where they came from a certain direction in the sky. Now, that's also an investment in the future. You know, that's like saying, we know there's a danger coming from that constellation, from that direction at a certain time of year. Let's transmit it through stones to the future. That's a very pagan thing. You know, like they alter the Mayan calendar to show you that there are cycles you need to be aware of, whether it be Ragnarok, whether it be the Kali Yuga, and so on. I do absolutely believe that we're at the end of one of those cycles. There's no doubt about it. This is why we're all here together. This is why we're doing things like this. This is not an accident. I really do feel that this is the end. You call it the Kali Yuga, the Ragnarok, you can call it, you know, any one of those things, but it absolutely is the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. Just by the behavior of people alone, you can tell that.
Yeah, it's also the end of the age of Pisces.
Speak about that. Talk about that.
Well, you know, it's pretty much, it's going to be the end of Abrahamism, you know, which is a very Piscean kind of thing. And it really just reflects the qualities of the Kali Yuga, where everything is kind of, we're living in a world of deception, illusions, which are very negative qualities of Pisces. Nothing is really real anymore. People have lost all senses of themselves and their roots. Not everyone, but a lot of people, you know, the masses. So, I mean, I know that a lot of folks are freaking out about this. And I know that you, Thomas, you've been you've been a source of comfort because you've told the truth about it, which is, this is supposed to happen. You better get the fuck out of the way. Don't try and stop this. But I mean, everything runs in cycles, in circles. So, you know, we'll get through this, another cycle, we'll start again, and then into infinity.
Yeah, it's supposed to happen. And I've been telling people, like, you know, there's a lot of injustices going on right now with the whole lockdown and everything. And you may have family members who want to get the needlecraft and you don't rage against it. Don't just stand aside and let the gods roll the dice, because to interfere in this clearly, you know, cosmic realignment of cycles is not a safe thing to do. You'll be trampled under Sleipnir's hooves. You absolutely will be, or you'll be impaled upon Odin's you know, blade. You will be, and I can't stress that enough to people. And once you accept that, you'll be very liberated. You'll feel a lot better. And you know, a lot of this stuff comes from where people are trying to, like, evangelical. That comes from the Abrahamic thing as well. I've got to bring people to my way of thinking. I have to convert them to my way of thinking. No, you have to tell them the information and then allow them the dignity or lack of thereof to come to the decision themselves. As painful as it is, nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You just have to let it run its course. And, you know, we've got Jupiter in Pisces now, so things are even more murky and unclear, depending on which side of the parallel society you're living on, because, you know, we're there and they're like way over there, but there's just no point in trying to convert anyone, get through to them. They just don't, it doesn't register, you know, like the only people that I try and talk to really are my parents. And it's just like, yes, but that nice lady on the BBC said this. So, you know, you can't be right.
And you would have found the last time this happened in history, whenever it was, the Renaissance or the fall of the beginning of Christianity, you would have the same people again. The same archetypes that are appearing now with this thing would have appeared back then in different forms. So it was just, it's like a cosmic role playing game almost.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's as old as the hills. I mean, that's interesting about the age. Christianity said is connected to Pisces. Now, when I think of Pisces in a fish, I think of going under the sea. I think of a very submerged thing. Would the submergence of that represent the paganism being submerged under the sea? And now with what's Aquarius is next, it's coming out of the sea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Aquarius is all about higher knowledge. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not quite out of it yet. It is going to be another good few years before we reach that point. So it's not going to be in our lifetimes, but eventually we're going to get there. Personally, though, I've actually had quite a good time throughout all of this. I have to say, like, I'm not, I've very strongly gone on my spiritual path. And when you are a pagan, you don't fear death. That is something that the Christians fought so hard to really, dismantle the lack of fear that the pagans had about death, because they knew that if you die bravely, if you're filled with courage, there are many different levels to the afterlife. That's the part of your soul that doesn't reincarnate. So there's nothing to fear. And they had to, the Christian church demonized that. They demonized Hela's realm in the afterlife, and they turned it into hell with this thing with the pitchfork and all of that. But that's that is a sad thing, because they're continuously cheated out of that. Even so atheists and all different kinds of people, they have no idea about how the afterlife actually exists.
It's amazing, and the atheists are often the most Abrahamic of them all in some ways. I don't know why. They're the most, they rail against the most. That's what they are.
Mm-hmm. It's like there's a template that, regardless of what you call it, whether it's called Christianity or it's called wokeism or whatever, it's the same story being told again, just with different filler in there. But
yeah, and Marxism is one of them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Fiona, I wanted to ask.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, Fiona, I was going to say, before we get off, you were talking about reincarnation, the parts of you that reincarnate. I was curious if there was any astrological connection there about not just your physical, tangible body in astrology, but if there are parts of you that, when you do reincarnate, leave an impression on your birth chart. And also with that, is that why sometimes if two parents come together and they try repeatedly to have a kid, but you as the person reincarnating, you wait until kind of the right time of year so that everything aligns right? Is there any kind of connection there, or am I grasping at straws?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that you're born at exactly at the right time, at the exact moment, in the right place, so that you do have a specific birth chart. As for the stuff about what was the first question that you asked me?
Oh, just about reincarnation. Does that leave markers there in your so to speak? Yeah.
Yeah, it actually does, but it's actually found within the fixed stars. So the astrology, the Western astrology birth chart, it's like a solar calendar, follows the wheel of the year. But of course, it's a mistake to leave out the fixed stars. They all have, the constellations, they all have qualities too. So in many ancient civilizations, including ancient Egypt, the belief was that when the pharaoh died, his soul rose and it went to Orion. And they actually put little scripts, like a magic spell, on the ceiling of his tomb where his body lay, so that he could find his way back. So when I'm looking at someone's chart, if I want to get an idea of where they've been, what their kind of really strong spiritual purpose is for their life, I will look at the fixed stars as well as certain points within the birth chart. But yeah, to answer your question, it's all there.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for answering.
A question I have, and this is going to get you from left field. Astrologically, when humans send spaceships to Mars and places like that, does that affect the astrology? Like right now, there's like they're landing lots of spaceships on Mars. Does that affect the astrology, or what is there? Well, there obviously would be astrological complications or effects, but what does that have any major effect?
It would have just for a short time though, unless they were actually born on Mars. If they were born on Mars, they would have a completely different chart. If they're just traveling to Mars, they're still going to have the same chart, but then they're going to get a different influence coming from Earth, if you know what I mean. But yeah, that is.
Because I was wondering about the astronauts that went to the moon. So many of them had like these weird spiritual all of them nearly had these weird spiritual crises after they came back. It was almost like a part of them became astrologically, what's the word, dovetailed into the moon. You know, it's you know, I find the whole spiritual implications of space travel fascinating. You know, like no one ever talks about the actual spiritual aspects of it, but I often find, like, you know, if humans did colonize other planets like Mars, like you said, it would be a whole other astrology.
It totally would, and to be honest, I've no idea how to calculate that. Like, I don't know. But yeah, that is interesting. But you know, I mean, shamans, you know, they used to talk about the ability to journey. You know, take a you know, in a spiritual sense, to take a spiritual journey to Mars or Venus, because they're not confined by their physical body. So maybe it's a lack of spirituality that is kind of causing this crisis, you know, when they return to Earth.
Well, it was that famous scene in that movie, The Right Stuff, about the early Apollo missions, and they go down. I think it was Dennis Quaid is down in Australia talking to the Aborigine shamans, the Aborigines, and he goes, "Oh, we've been up this mice." And he goes, "Who?" "Well, he has that bloke over there." And he lights the fire and he's sending the sparks up into space. And they're like, "Yeah, I mean, they have the Dogon in West Africa, who have been, you know, they claimed their ancestors came, or maybe they were on the binary star. That's one of the most incredible stories in the world. The binary star of Sirius, in that amazing Robert Temple book, The Sirius Mystery. I mean, and they're a very remarkable people with a real story to tell, who are sadly being force converted by the Abrahamic religions, Islam. And it's terrifying to me, because they're probably the most powerful and largest pagan culture in West Africa. And they're doing things like, it's just like what happened to Christians in Europe. They're being denied things like passports and stuff like that unless they convert. It's awful. The Abrahamic, you know, the usual story.
That's horrible. That's absolutely dreadful. It makes me so sick, because they're having everything stolen from them, you know, just as the way that, you know, African slaves did. They had all of their, you know, their spiritual practices, their history, everything stolen. And now, you know, we've had ours stolen over here, and we all need to work very hard to retain our history, because it gives us a sense of belonging, a sense of roots, even if we don't live there anymore. I mean, it just makes you feel more whole. So you have to hang on to it.
Yeah, well, pagans, being resourceful and clever as they are, I'm fascinated by how these Afro-Caribbean and Latino cultures in America take Christianity and turn it into a kind of paganism, like Santa Muerte or Santeria. That's, to me, is fascinating. I even know people who use I've heard of them, that use the Book of Revelations in the Bible as a grimoire for the accumulation of wealth. And so there's very interesting ideas of taking their own stuff, and, you know, the way they took ours, that we could also take theirs. And that's what's happening with the Latinos in America. They're taking Christian saints and they're paganizing them. In Mexico, places.
Yeah, I mean, there's African American hoodoo, you know, which was like a hybrid of voodoo and, you know, the Christianity, and they would, you know, I mean, it's still a thriving practice over there, and they take verses out of the Bible, you know, for love magic or for cursing, you know, and they use like graveyard dirt and all, you know, that kind of stuff. But I mean, there has been. It's folk practices.
Yeah, one good archetype is as good as the other. You know, depending on how you use it. In Sicily, they use you know, like they use the concept of Christian saints as almost like the way demons are used in the Lesser Key of Solomon. They have the saint is called upon as a power force. And this was actually big with the mafia, believe it or not. The La Costa Nostra is actually an occult organization before they're the mafia. And they use these rituals called the burning of the saints, where you would impose your personality that you wear into a picture of a saint, say Saint Martin or whatever. And then in sympathetic magic ways, you burn that mask card of the saint. And therefore you're a new person. You're a new within the family of La Costa Nostra. And that's pure paganism. That's pure paganism. So it's like in certain parts of Europe, they have been doing that already for a long time.
I was just thinking about how earlier we were talking about the kind of space paganism, and both of you moved from Ireland to the United States at one point and then moved back. And we're talking about the spiritual consequences of that. And I would imagine it would be something similar, like if we had, but at an exponential level, potentially. Like Fiona, you said you moved here to the States, but you needed to go back. And I would imagine if there are folks that go and colonize Mars or the moon or something, there's going to be that exponential effects of a spiritual crisis there. Of, your roots are on Earth. And yeah, if you're born there, just like an Irish American or an Italian American family moves to the U.S. and has children here on this land, but those children still have to have that connection back to the ancestral soul there, their people. So I imagine it'll be something similar with the kind of space shamanism, space paganism. There will be those effects, but they'll just be, tenfold greater than, moving from Ireland to the U.S., for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would become a gigantic lunatic asylum if, I don't think that it would be possible for them to be healthy away from their ancestral lands because it's so important. I mean, in my case, when I tried to move, I wanted to move, but I was literally shoved back, into this island just for one reason after another. But I'm glad that I didn't leave now. I love Ireland. I hated it for such a long time, but it was really because of the trauma that I'd experienced here. But now that I've kind of cleared that, I love Ireland.
With me, when I went to America, I was determined not to become a paddy over there, like an Irish American. I threw myself fully into American culture. And I'm glad I did. Like, I didn't hang out with Irish people or Irish communities or anything like that. I became very Americanized very quickly and just fell in love with the culture and the people as well. Funny enough, though, I was more, even though I lived in New York, I was more drawn to things like the Hudson Valley and upstate New York and those kinds of places. I love the nature and the forests of the Northeast and that kind of thing, even though I was working an awful lot. When I came back to Ireland, why I came back to Ireland, I just felt that I couldn't stay away. It was like not a romantic thing. It was almost like no matter how much I assimilated into U.S. society, and believe me, I did very strongly, I still felt like that it wasn't my land. I can't explain that. Although I have a great love for the USA, a tremendous fondness for it and its people. And I am definitely like, a Yankee phobe, whatever you want to call it, a file. And I just, it's fantastic, it's wonderful, but it's not the real thing. That's the way I could put it, for me, it wasn't the real thing. It's like Jason was going, but he wants to go back to California.
Yeah.
You know, where he
it's right.
Thing.
And I still would be curious to visit the places that my my maternal and paternal side of the family are from Germany and Czechoslovakia. So it'd be just interesting to see what my body's what switches on there within my physical existence from being in those places that my ancestral roots come from genetically.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, before I actually found out, I had a good idea, but before I discovered that I had such like a large portion of, Scandinavian in me, I actually did I went to Sweden. I went to Denmark, but I didn't stay there for very long. You take the train over to Sweden, and it had such a profound, effect on me in a spiritual way. And I touched a rune stone. And I was like, wow, I love it here. And it's like, I want to move, I want to move. But then my life really did actually start to change after that. It was it wasn't too long after that I discovered this path that I'm on. So it absolutely does have an impact on you if you visit your ancestral lands. So I definitely encourage you to do that.
I've had people, Irish Americans, I've taken them around the stone circles and stuff. And even ones they might have like their husband or their wife with them who's not particularly interested in seeing a stone circle or a megalith or something. And you see them walking around and they suddenly go quiet. And their before what was just a bunch of rocks, you can see it's like spooling around this. You can actually see a change in their behavior that almost like the ancestors, they're saying there's something here. There's something about this that's got me interested. And it's like bang, bang, bang. Ancestral codes are switching on, like sequences, like an old software. It's like the way the current software today is built upon the software of the 1960s. It's like the 1960s software is still in there, in your operating system. It's the same thing with your body. The ancestral codes from the past are still in there, way, way down, but they're still there, and they can be switched on.
They can, and if you can't travel, then work with your ancestral gods, because that will do it too. That's what that's what it does. It, you get all the New Agers and they talk about like Pleiadian DNA, like crystal, rainbow, unicorn activations, and all of that. And it's just good way to get a demonic attachment. But when you work with your ancestral gods, it absolutely does activate your DNA in the way that you just described.
Yeah, that's true. I've got like 20% Norwegian, which is quite common for Dubliners, because Norwegians Vikings founded the city. But again, like I'd be typical, and yet most Irish people aren't even aware of this. That you have a huge either Norwegian or Danish ancestry in you. I do. Well, yeah, the Vikings were here for 300 years. What do you think you were doing? So, how are we doing now? We've been on for an hour. Anything else you want to talk about, Fiona?
I don't think so. I think that's pretty much it covered. Unless you guys have any more questions for me.
No, I think you basically covered everything there. Tell us about anything like a website, the astrology readings, anything like that you do, so people and how people can contact you.
Sure. You can contact me through my website, FionaEdgar.com. And I do offer a number of different readings from half an hour to 2 hours. Got a price list on there. I've also got a number of articles that I've written, other podcast appearances. I'm also a teacher of astrology. I can teach someone who has no knowledge of astrology to read a birth chart. So you can check that out. All of my courses are one-on-one, university style, over Skype. So that's how you can get in touch with me.
Well, that's wonderful. I want to thank you for coming on the first show, and hopefully you'll be able to reach some new people. And it went very well, I think. I think Jason, we're both happy with that. And I hope everyone watching at home will be tuning in for the next one, because a lot more of these to come. So good night or good day, goodbye, wherever you are, and we'll see you on. Once again, thanking Fiona Aedgar. Thanking you all for being here on the Beyond Room 313 Symposium. Bye-bye.